This is the Overton Pods. Welcome to another episode. Thanks for staying with us or joining us for the first time, I guess. Kanthan, hello.
Good to see you again, John. It's been like a month since the last one.
It has been a while.
Yeah.
You've been busy?
A lot has happened in the interim, yes.
I haven't noticed.
Uh-huh.
I locked down my Twitter account, and so basically the world hasn't happened. It's wonderful.
I see, but I guess that kind of explains why we've had this dearth of pithy comments around tariffs and the like.
From me? Or?
Yeah, from you, yeah.
I've really, what are we meant to do at this point? The government has abandoned any common sense.
Uh-huh.
I actually was thinking this morning, the reason why they've done nothing about tariffs, other than being stupid, and I genuinely think we are ruled by idiots, but one of the main reasons is obviously none of them are directly affected. They're unable to quantify second and third order effects. We know this, or they don't care about those. And so they haven't realized that the tariffs will have a negative impact on them indirectly. But if you look at, for example, why we were fighting a war in the Congo, that was because someone has mining interests there. Okay.
Well, partly. I mean, technically we were part of a Pan-African peacekeeping force.
I'm not interested. We're part of lots of Pan-African nonsense.
But yes, the fact of the matter is there was a disproportionate interest in that part of the world.
So with the tariffs, I can tell you right now that it's very clear that no one in government owns a large citrus farm, for example. And so as a result, they don't care.
But it's got nothing to do with the large citrus farms.
Well,
so to put this in perspective, what's going to happen is that the large citrus farms are going to continue to export. It just so happens that the farmers are going to end up earning less money as a result, of the overall impact. Because what that means is that the goods will enter the United States at a higher price point, which means that the farmers will be forced to, effectively drop their pricing in order to be able to accommodate
that might happen, although farmers that I've spoken with, and not many, I admit, but farmers that I've spoken with have said they are likely to just stop growing a lot of their crops. So they're not they're not going to drop their prices because they're not making 50% markups or even 30% markups on their product, and so a 30% tariff, which will probably become 40%, will.
Why do you say it'll probably become 40? By the way.
Because we're going to continue to be intransigent, and being intransigent, Trump has already threatened that.
We'll touch on that at
we
some
will.
point. But look, I think a positive side effect in terms of the citrus farmers, for example, is I think that if you consider that they will just simply stop exporting them, is there likely to be sufficient demand in terms of the domestic market? I think the answer to that is yes, because certainly what happened, a lot of us, realized at the time 30 years ago when the international markets opened up to us, the best products that were made in our country were suddenly leaving the country. And so, I would visit the UK and walk into an M&S or a Waitrose or one of those places and see all of these beautiful outspan oranges on the shelves. Mm-hmm. And, I was not getting them back home.
No.
And you cannot walk into a single supermarket in this country right now and find real orange juice being sold.
So that's the comment that's being made by some farmers is, no, you're not actually going to see those products suddenly hit our shelves because they can't afford to produce them for our shelves. The amount of expense and science, frankly, that goes into producing that kind of product is just not an expense that the South African market will pay. And unfortunately, much as you think you're very important shopping at Woolworths, that's not where the majority of the population shops.
Certainly, yes.
So, and that's just one industry. And all I'm saying is I think these guys clearly aren't involved in a business where there's a hole in their balance sheet.
So let me tell you, I ran some numbers earlier today, which, and this was one of those annoying things where, I pointed out that we have a net trade surplus with the U.S. Well, we had a trade surplus with the U.S., whereas we have a trade deficit with China, because everyone says China's our biggest trading partner, and they go on about this. And you have to point out to people that the relationship with the U.S. was a net benefit to our economy.
Right.
whereas the relationship with China is a net drain on the economy. And it's a very simple thing to actually work out. So someone then posts the figures from SARS Customs and Excise, which shows that as a percentage of exports, our exports to the US are 7.1%. Are 7.6%, whereas 7.1% is correct. Yeah, whereas our imports from the US are 7.6%, and it's kind of like, I got you. And then the idiots don't bother to actually calculate the percentages based on the numbers. Okay, because there's a disparity between our export numbers and our import numbers. And so I run the math on this thing, and it turns out that we currently have a trade surplus, just based on the figures from SARS, with the US of $8 billion a year. Now, when you factor in the 30% tariff that we've currently been hit with, we go from an 8 billion rand a year surplus to a 33 billion rand a year deficit with the United States, which is still significantly lower than our trade deficit with China. But the overall impact on the bottom line of the South African enterprise is huge.
Yeah, it's, again, as I say, I think anyone with a brain knows these numbers. The problem we have is we are led by, as I said, idiots who are only there for their own self-interests. But they're also seemingly too dumb to realize that their own self-interest would benefit from growing an economy. We've discussed this before. Snubbing the Americans just is a bad idea. Everyone realizes that. Keep hearing how tariffs are bad for Americans. Okay, tariffs are only bad for Americans. Why is the Swiss president getting on a plane right now, as we're recording this, and flying to the United States? Because his country's tariffs are also north of 30%. If it's only going to damage the Americans, why would the Swiss president care?
So, there was a deal that was signed with Japan, where Japan basically agreed to pay the United States what Trump called a signing bonus. And it was a $550 billion signing bonus.
Sure.
Okay, which is basically money. It's in protection money that Japan is going to pay to the United States just for the privilege of trading with the United States. Why?
Yeah.
Because they cannot afford to actually end up losing that market. And immediately at the point at which Japan ended up signing that deal, South Korea, who were in a very similar situation to Japan, have immediately stuck up their hands and said, hey, we want to do something similar out here. And
of course, Europe has followed suit.
Yes.
You've seen that happen.
And as recently as this morning, you have the newly elected president of Poland who says that we need to redraw our law so that our sovereignty is maintained, and basically Ursula von der Leyen cannot speak for us on specific issues because, he went to Trump and said, why, when we are one of your strongest allies, have you hit us with this deal? And the answer from the Trump administration is, well, the deal is negotiated on your behalf by the European Union.
Yeah. Well, I found that particularly interesting. So Trump potentially did more to break up the EU a couple of weeks back than anything else has, in the sense that Ursula von der Leyen, good friends with our communist government, by the way, so no great human being, but Ursula von der Leyen finds herself with Trump in Scotland. Actually, funnily enough, that whole thing maybe was discussed. It was hilarious.
Yeah, we'll
it was
get
amazing.
to Scotland
but she sits there with him and makes this deal for 15%. The Germans and the French lose their minds and go, "Who the hell is Ursula von der Leyen to be negotiating on behalf of us?" The Macron government was very upset. The German government was very upset, and a few of the other states in Europe were cross as well, and that got pointed out to them exactly. You guys have chosen to be a unified economic. In fact, that's what the EU started as. That's actually what made kind of some sense, is they started as an economic zone. And where, as an economic zone, you've decided to have group negotiating power, essentially, unified negotiating power, which you thought stood you in good stead. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes the deals aren't going to be to your liking. I think with countries like Germany and France, they've probably gotten out quite well with a 15% tariff, frankly.
But let's actually talk about the mechanics of that 15% tariff because it's actually a critical thing. And my point from the get-go is if we had negotiated with Trump, we would have landed at 15%. And let me tell you why this actually
That seems completely correct
Yes.
on the point of other African countries being in a very similar boat right now.
So the reason why that 15% is kind of roughly the benchmark that the Trump administration has been shooting to is that remember that the U.S. doesn't have the concept of value-added tax, VAT. So to put this in perspective, what that means is, let's say you're producing an avocado in the United States and you ship it to South Africa at, let's say, roughly R5 an avo, and it lands on in South Africa and gets sold in any of our retail stores, and there's a 15% VAT put on top of it. Produce an avo in South Africa, ship it across to the U.S. at R5, and it's going to be sold at R5.
They do have state sales tax, though. So
they
what
do
would
have
you say
state
to
sales tax, but again, this is not something that accrues to the national fiscus. Okay, the states are always going to put up that sales tax, but that's not something that directly impacts on the production side. So, perspective again on this. Let's say you're manufacturing cars in the United States and you're manufacturing cars in Germany. Now, you're both selling cars in Germany. Now, the German car manufacturer is also selling the car with VAT payable on the car, except the German car manufacturer is able to reclaim a lot of the VAT in various ways because of the expense chain that happens to be based in that country.
Sure.
Whereas the car that is manufactured in the United States doesn't get the benefit of all of those rebates. So effectively, the VAT in that country is a tariff.
Yeah.
And all Trump is doing is flipping the script. So when people say there's no reciprocity, well, actually there is.
The part of the conversation I think is really important that hasn't been had. And I mean, I appreciate what you're saying about how they work and what it balances out, etc. But I think what people forget is that, and the prediction was, in fact, you were, I thought, illuminating when we did the podcast around all the tariffs. You had listened to Scott Bessent on a podcast that he did. I think All In, he did that podcast, and you were referencing that. So it's still good to go listen to. Very smart guy. And at that time, we were all being told this is going to be a disaster. It's going to cause a recession. And
just to interrupt for a second,
yes.
Good point to remind people that Scott Bessent is the person who made George Soros incredibly
yes,
rich.
which we discussed in that podcast.
Yeah.
And so that was what was being told. Even on that podcast, I think there was someone in the comments who sort of said, you guys are idiots, you have no idea what you're talking about. Trump's going to destroy the global economy and the US economy, et cetera, et cetera. And really, that's not what's happened. There was a good clip online the other day. You can search it on X, where essentially Scott Jennings, I think it is, who's always on CNN. He's the sort of token Republican on CNN. He basically threw the words of Richard Quest and that whole crew back at them because they all said this will definitely lead to a recession by July. We're all in huge trouble, etc. And of course, the numbers are almost better than they've ever been. There are some weak job numbers, which we must talk about a bit later, coming out from the States. That said, everything seems very stable. The markets are kind of the best they've ever been, etc., etc. And the reason that hasn't really been spoken about is that there was a hijacking of global trade that occurred in the late 70s, early 80s, when the World Trade Organization became the de facto organization which negotiated all trade deals between every single country on earth. And that was created by the United Nations, essentially, which turned around and said, well, we don't have enough control. Okay, we're a global organization. We want to control everything. And of course, the so-called globalists thought this was a great idea. So we'll make a centralized organization that negotiates these deals. And it has to be fair, Kanthan. There has to be equity. And so, you can't have a country like America having a trade deal with Cambodia where Cambodia sells a product for $1 to America and America sells a product to Cambodia for $1 and they each land on each other's shores at $1. That's not fair because Cambodia is poor and they don't have as much resource, et cetera, et cetera. And so World Trade Organization deals, actually the World Trade Organization in and of itself interfered with the entire principle and concept of free trade. And so everyone who's been moaning that tariffs are not free trade is correct. in principle, that tariffs interfere with free trade. The problem we've had is that we haven't had free trade for about 50 years now. And so all this does in many respects is it equalizes a lot of the free trade that we haven't had. And now with some of the tariffs, we're actually closer to free trade than we were before, which is why you're not seeing the economic damage. And I find it annoying that level of understanding isn't discussed anywhere. I don't know what your take is on that.
You've pretty much nailed it. And the reason for that is that people actually don't understand the fundamentals of economics and the fundamentals of trade. And again, it's because of this entire idea that if you take the global context that you've just described with the US and Cambodia and translate it to the South African context where people want to impose protectionist measures for spaza shops because of the fact that the supermarkets are too big and they want economic incentives and it's exactly the same twisted logic. It's because they don't understand the basics of how free enterprise is meant to actually work and prosper.
Yeah.
So, look, we're not hiding to nothing with this because we don't really have people in our government right now who are speaking to this with any amount of common sense.
Can I ask you a question, though? Yes, we know the ANC, I've said it, I'm saying it for probably the fifth time now in a short space of time, are idiots, don't understand any of this, are incapable of overcoming this problem. Both from an intelligence perspective, but also from an ideological perspective. My concern is this. If tomorrow we all woke up and the ANC was wiped from all memory, they didn't exist, and the DA was suddenly in charge, or the Freedom Front Plus was in charge, or the IFP was in charge, or Gayton McKenzie's PA was in charge, whoever, which party has clearly delineated that they understand the problem here, what needs to be done, and that they could fix this in any reasonable amount of time?
There's no party that comes to mind from my side. I don't know if your experience
No, that's why I'm asking the question out of concern.
Yeah.
Because my concern is that if you gave the DA power tomorrow, which many people believe, if you believe the pollsters, who I think are basically paid liars, but if you believe the pollsters, they will tell you that the DA is polling higher than they've ever polled. That if you had an election today, the DA would win something like 40% of the vote. Okay? Let's assume they're correct. 40% of the vote in 2029 gives the DA control of this country, unequivocally, because they could probably exclude the ANC.
Yes.
They could go DA plus a couple of other parties. They could give those parties things which don't matter, like they've been given essentially in this government, and they could then run ahead with Department of Trade and Industry, Foreign Affairs, the presidency, obviously, and they could really control things. I haven't heard anything from the DA explaining. I've seen a tweet that they made about how this is all the ANC's fault. Okay, the ANC screwed this up, and they have nothing to do with it. Hilarious, of course, in the GNU. And if you have nothing to do with it and you're so obviously against it, then you should leave that organization. That's what you should be doing, guys. But I've seen nothing else that says, if we were in charge, this is how we would have managed this. These are the economic principles on which we would have behaved and how we would have resolved this and come to a resolution, and how, as you've correctly stated, we would have ended up somewhere around 15%, which is kind of seems to be the number Trump obviously had in his head from the beginning, and is the number everyone who has basically been friendly, who's come to the table and said, look, we're willing to make the necessary compromises. What are you willing to do? Trump has turned around and gone 15% with the EU, willing to go lower? No. In those words exactly, no. I don't care if I look mean. That's what he said in Scotland.
Yep.
15%. But 15%, far better than double that.
And 15% is pretty much the best that we could have expected in this country if we had actually upped our game and negotiated up front.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we could have got it lower. We don't have the vision.
No, I don't think we could have gotten less than 15%. And really, the reason why I'm saying this is it comes back to the whole concept of VAT, and based on the fact that VAT is an effective tariff on all imports that come into the country.
Perhaps,
and you need to understand that this is the thinking on the part of Team Trump, and that is what actually drives their understanding of
Yeah, so
the
that
level
even
at
if you zero rate American goods, they're still going to pay a tax
correct
on
yes,
sale.
Yeah, so which is why you've got some African countries which don't have VAT,
Hmm.
which have come in at around about 10%.
And I'm going to say why I think we could have got it lower, even with our VAT at 15%. And the reason I think we could have done that is I think we could offer the Americans some things that don't currently exist. That could be a large amount of investment on the American side. That would be fracking and drilling. We could offer basically that they can come in and develop the oil fields on our west coast, that they could frack in the Karoo and in other areas of the country, as we've discussed before, which would be billions and over time trillions of dollars. And I also think that we should be offering them a forward operating base in this country, which makes complete sense because the Iranians control the Straits of Hormuz, and the only other way for trade to move around the world is around the Cape. And
no, you're confusing the Straits of Hormuz with the Suez Canal, because the Suez Canal is a bottleneck. The Straits of Hormuz is only a bottleneck in terms of the oil travel.
Sure, sorry.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Not
All right, okay.
global trade, oil trade,
Right, yeah.
But global trade as well. And to be honest, that's not a
No,
safe...
look, it's very clear that that's foremost on Trump's mind. So if you look in terms of the entire narrative around Greenland, as an example, part of the reason for that is because the U.S. is quite insistent on the need to actually control the Arctic sea route.
Correct.
Because right now, Russia has a stranglehold on that. And by getting control of Greenland, the U.S. is effectively going to be able to do that. And we need to understand that the U.S. effectively already has control of Greenland because they have a significant military presence on the island. And no doubt that's going to come to the forefront within the next period. But the interesting thing that you just brought up actually cuts to the heart of what we need to be looking at, because fundamentally right now, if we were in a situation where, John, we had energy independence, as you and I have spoken about many times, we could actually cock a snook at this particular tariff structure. And the reason for that is that if you run the numbers right now in terms of our current oil consumption rates of roughly 600,000 barrels of oil a day, and if you subtract what is made by Sasol, we end up with roughly 500,000 barrels of oil per day that we need to be finding in order to run this country. And if you translate that into the current Rand-dollar exchange rate and the current Brent crude oil price, there's roughly R1 billion every 2 days that leaves our shores, primarily to Saudi Arabia, because of the fact that we need all of that oil in order to run this country. Now, just imagine that you've got 365 divided by 2 billion every year. So, yeah, 100 and something billion, that suddenly accrues to the bottom line, versus the 33 billion that the Trump tariffs are now going to cost us effectively. Well, it would make a huge difference. And it would also mean that there's money that's not leaving the country, at which point we can afford to be doing all of these other things.
I'm sorry, Kanthan, are you telling me just getting multinational digital companies to invest in Cape Town isn't going to cut it?
It isn't going to cut it.
I'm shocked because the DA has told me otherwise. They're very excited. And Bill Gates is building lots of wind turbines and laying down solar farms over arable land. So that will surely solve all our problems.
These effing idiots think that they're going to be able to run data centers at our current electricity prices. And they don't have a clue.
Yes, I do see a new data center being built in Midrand. I don't know if you've driven past there. Quite an impressive development. The thickest concrete I've ever seen in a building.
Well, how many GPUs are they looking at?
I have no idea, but they're really impressive construction in terms of the concrete and the chimneys coming out of there and the HVAC units, etc. But I don't know where they think they're getting the energy from to do that. And perhaps that is the solution, because it seems that the only thing we really respond to in this country, much as we say we won't be bullied, and much as we say neo-colonial interests, I see Durko was tweeting out about neo-colonial interests or something. The reality is we listen to everyone else because we don't have ideas of our own. Let's remember that the ANC runs the entire government based on Soviet paperwork.
The truth of the matter, John, is we don't listen to everyone else. Because the Chinese tell us differently. The Indians tell us differently. And I want to be clear.
We don't listen to everything.
No. I'm saying that the ideas that the Chinese give us in terms of the economy are generally good. You and I have spoken about the fact that there was an agreement that was brokered during Jacob Zuma's time, for the Chinese to be building a smelter up in Limpopo province, was signed off by Jacob Zuma, was then subsequently signed off again by Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yeah.
And still, the bureaucratic nightmare that is South Africa did not allow the Chinese to actually get that project off the ground, because the Chinese were going to build the smelter. They were going to build a power plant that was associated with actually driving the smelter. And all of this was supposed to have happened 15 years ago. Now what's happened? The Chinese have moved across to Limpopo. They're building it on the side of Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Because of
So let me clarify what I mean. Is obviously we don't take everyone's ideas. We certainly don't take the good ones usually. But if I look at the EU saying they'll give us $9 billion or thereabouts
in loans.
In loans, sure,
loans,
but to convert to green energy. A great graph I got sent the other day. I'll post it. After this podcast releases. But the graph essentially shows energy prices in South Africa. Obviously, steady rises since the start of the 21st century, and then a massive jump after sort of 2013, I think it is, all the worst of the load shedding or whatever. Then they try to fund all their chaos. And then 2019, 2020, just skyrockets upwards. And the reason for that is because we've decided we're going to renewables are how we're going to go. And obviously, as we've discussed almost ad nauseum at this point, you cannot fund you cannot supply the base load with renewables. It's just not possible. Not going to happen in this country. We're doing it, and we're making energy more expensive as a result. We've discussed how we could make energy cheaper, but that's an example of the DA taking not the DA, the ANC, but the DA might as well. The DA, by the way, is doing that in Cape Town, in the Western Cape, without a doubt. The Western Cape is being uglified as we speak. Every time I go there, I see new wind turbines being put up on what is some of the most beautiful landscape in the world, and basically just being destroyed by these unenvironmentally friendly windmills that humans abandoned in the 1900s.
Frankly, I cannot imagine that the wind turbine industry is going to survive.
No, none of it will survive. It's all a bubble, Kanthan.
Yeah, it's a particular bubble that has now been completely destroyed in the United States and is very quickly going to be shutting down in most other parts of the world. People will still continue to be, building wind turbines for a while, but just the sheer carbon footprint in terms of delivering a single wind turbine to its place, and the amount of concrete that needs to be poured into the ground,
and oil lubricants
and all of that kind of stuff, and it is an absolute fiasco.
Yeah,
it is. But remember that you don't have, of all of these people that are currently sitting in government, the only person that you could probably call an engineer is our Minister of Electricity.
Yeah.
Everyone else,
who happens to be quite against renewables, I will add.
Good for him.
For good reason, because he obviously can read and look at numbers and generating capacity. The point I was making is perhaps at some point we will be forced into some sort of corner that the likes of Europe or the United States, if we have any relationship with them at that point, or Iran or China or whoever, or Russia or whoever's side we happen to listen to, will say, guys, you could really dig yourself out of a hole here. Or they won't say it like that. They'll say something like, look, we will give you $10 billion again in loans. So we can take $100 billion out of the ground in your country. But maybe that's the way we kind of get to that point of actually developing those things. Because it's all propaganda. I saw a Hilux bakkie the other day. And it wasn't a new one. It was probably about 15 years old. And on the bakkie was a sticker. And the sticker a bumper sticker said something like, no fracking of our land, or something like that. And I just thought to myself, that person driving that bakkie has no clue what fracking is, has no idea of the potential of that, nothing. They were sold a line, fracking is going to destroy the environment. Fracking is going to contaminate the groundwater was the one. They had a film at the time which was sheer propaganda of someone turning on a tap and lighting the water, and the water bursting into flames because it was full of methane. And, that's the kind of propaganda. And so we've got very close to fracking in the early 2010s, which would have changed the entire course of this country for the net positive, and we sort of abandoned it. And so it's all propaganda, it's all politics, really. No one actually is in this narrative. No one's engaging with the truth of what
But
that
the net
is.
impact of all of it, and you have to keep coming back to this, is to keep the country impoverished.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter, how you look at it, no matter how you spin it. The net impact of not having unlimited cheap energy is impoverishment, because there's nothing that's actually going to unlock this economy as quickly as cheap energy. The interesting thing that came out of the AI summit that Trump hosted last week, fascinating, listening to all of the stuff that's going down about there. But the key to Trump's quest now to turn the U.S. into the biggest AI superpower on, pretty much in the universe from his perspective,
Yes.
is to unlock unlimited cheap energy. And he's just taken a complete slash and burn in terms of all of the red tape that's associated with energy. So,
Except for nuclear.
No, for
I will
nuclear.
say.
Nuclear
there
as well.
wasn't enough slash there.
No, but-
you're talking about the EPA regulations, which were basically changed. A very interesting thing about what was done there.
I'm not talking about the EPA and.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
I'm not talking about the EPA regulations.
Okay.
I'm talking very specifically about the fact that he's now empowered every single company that wants to be able to, set up a plant wherever they want to be able to just build their own power plant. And he doesn't care whether it's gas, he doesn't care whether it's coal, he doesn't care what is going to power it, but they have the right to build their own power plant at the lowest possible cost. He's incentivizing them to position these things to the cheapest, to the nearest available cheap source of natural gas, because he's focusing on natural gas as the fastest way to bring electricity.
Which is
to the
100%
masses.
accurate.
Yes, it's 100% accurate. And so he's rolling out the red carpet for them at that level. He's saying you can basically build your own power plant. When you're building your own power plant, okay, you can write off 100% of the cost of that immediately. Tax write-off straight away. Okay, everything that he's doing right now is incentivizing the fastest build-out possible in terms of natural gas as the single biggest contributor to upping the quantity of electricity. So firstly, go ahead, build your natural gas. If you have surplus, you can feed it back into the grid and sell it to the national grid. He's unlocked the limitations around nuclear, but more to the point, he's keeping subsidies in place for nuclear. Now, why is he keeping subsidies in place for nuclear? His logic is very simply, we've actually hamstrung nuclear for the past 2 decades, based on the fact that everyone else got subsidies, but nuclear did not. So he's saying we're scrapping all of the other subsidies, the Green New Scam, as he calls it.
Yeah.
But we are putting in place subsidies for nuclear
To drive that sector.
drive that particular sector, and there's a finite limit on it. Okay, there's a 10-year expiration date in terms of the
So
subsidies.
build now, basically.
Build now, basically. To get, and that basically what that means is that nuclear takes a long time to build out compared to natural gas. You can talk in terms of months for natural gas. You need to talk in terms of years, in terms of even small.
Even decades up to in some places.
Yeah, except right now, nobody's going to be going for those old Westinghouse type nuclear reactors that were in places like 3 Mile Island and that kind of place. It's going to be small modular reactors, and there's exciting stuff happening on that level around the world. Saw a report just a couple of days ago, which Kelvin Kem sent to me. Smart guy, by the way. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to pay attention to him. Probably one of the most knowledgeable people in terms of the nuclear industry in this country. But there's a build-out now happening in Namibia of small modular reactors that's driven by a South African team, which is, again, stuff that's happening around us, but we're not getting there quickly enough. So the interesting thing right now in terms of the natural gas to electricity conversion. So this person that I know very well had actually run a natural gas pipeline from Ekurhuleni from Sasol and Ekurhuleni through to the Sandton CBD, and offered to bring 500 megawatts online in order to be able to power Sandton and the surroundings within a 3-year time frame. And he's been sitting and waiting on clearance for that for more than a decade now.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So it's available there,
So-
and you've got the ability to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the story of this country at the moment, and certainly for the last 30 years, and obviously extending beyond that into the previous regime. But the real story is just lost potential. I mean, it's still fundamentally amazing to me. I really have weaned myself a little bit off social media of late because I find it just to be not very useful. Certainly useful as a news source on occasion, but in terms of the feedback you get on there, not particularly useful. There's just too much idiocy, too much hatred, and just unpleasantness on there. It's just not valuable. And some hatred can be valuable. Actually, you can see you can see the wood for the trees, who's who. But the main thing that people in this country can't seem to get over is, obviously we descend further into economic collapse, and we descend further into this racial kind of politics, obviously driven by the politicians and the political parties who benefit from it. But as we do that, it's unbelievable to me that people can't do basic maths, because let's say there's 4 million white people. So let's say you hate all the white people. And there are some people who really, really do. Some of them, worked for Newsroom Africa until very recently. And let's say you hate all the white people. And if you could, you would murder all the white people. That's what you would do. But you can't do that, because the one law we still have that we sort of pay respect to is murder. Not always, but we kind of, mass murder would probably be a problem. So you can't do that. You can't get rid of it. So you kind of persecute these people. But if you did the opposite, let's say you said, let's let those people be as successful as they possibly can be. There's actually only 2.5 million white people who aren't kids.
Yes.
Okay. So it's 2.5 million white folk. And I know I'm focusing on the white folks. We could do this with the Indian folk as well, or the Chinese folk. Let's just do the white folk. 2.5 million white folk in the country, and probably around 50 million black folk. If 2.5 million white folk are all incredibly successful, why does everyone think it just stops there? Like there's a line or something. It's like, why wouldn't you want those people to be as successful as possible? Because the reality is they have to do business with the other 50 million people in the country. And that economy means it brings in all of those.
Except, John, people don't understand the concept of growing the pie rather than
just taking from what's there already.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is the fundamental issue we're fighting with, and I don't think the majority of South Africans are on that page. We've had this discussion. Even with Ramon, we kind of discussed it. You guys sort of said, well, we think in daily life people are generally good to each other, and relations are generally good, and people aren't bigoted and all the rest of it. Fine. But certainly the people in control of things just have such a warped sense of concept, because if we grow the economy for any group of people, the reality is that everyone is going to benefit. Absolutely everyone. That's how an economy works, because money goes from, round and round. And when they say that, it goes from hand to hand to hand through 10s or 20 or 30 or hundreds of hands.
And we're seeing this happening in Argentina right now as we speak.
Well, I mean, what an amazing... we've said it before. I feel like it's a bit of a recap podcast, but you look at Argentina with Milei. I mean, we were all told by Richard Poplack, that doyen of the Daily Maverick, we were told by him that we could expect disaster. Absolute catastrophe and disaster. I think he told us to bookmark something about a year and a bit ago about how there was going to be absolute disaster in Argentina. Well, Argentina's just growing. It's basically got 7-8% economic growth. Everyone's kind of being lifted by the rising tide. Yes. Are there still problems? Absolutely, because it's a country that's coming from problems. That would be like saying South Africa has economic growth of 5% for 5 years, and suddenly the middle class grows by 5 million people, and then you point to 20 million people still under the breadline. Yeah, that's going to be true, but that's 20 million. It's 5 million less than the 5 million you had before, right? And so Argentina just doing amazingly. Bukele, frankly, doing amazingly in El Salvador on one principle, which is crime.
Get rid of crime.
I actually think we've discussed this before, but I've really started to think quite deeply about it now. And I think that is, I think someone should just start the crime party. or the anti-crime party, whatever, use the name you think would work best. The only goal is crime.
The Skopskitten party.
Whatever, 100%. The Skopskitten, whatever you want. I think that might be a little bit too reminiscent of unpleasant times. But the reality is the Shambok party. Whatever it is, the point is this. If you say we're going to tackle crime and everyone goes, well, how is that going to help? No, not just crime. Not just people stealing, hijacking your car, murder. Yes, absolutely. We're going to focus on those things. Pedestrians, jaywalking. We're going to stop that crime as well. Because actually most of our road deaths are pedestrians.
Yep.
In the wrong place.
And drunk pedestrians.
Drunk in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we're going to stop that from happening. But wait, there's more. Corruption. When government corruption takes place, that's a crime. We're going to stop that. But when corruption happens in the private sector, it's also a crime. We're going to stop that.
As well. Yes.
Now imagine if that's all you did. You changed nothing else. I'm not talking about changing any policies. No change in laws, no change in policy. You just use the laws on the book to prosecute all crime, no matter what level it happens at. That would fundamentally change. You could change nothing else. Leave the BE laws. I don't like them, but leave them for the moment, right? Just tackle crime. Okay, the crime of fronting. Tackle that if you want to talk about BEE, right? Because that will actually push people to go, oh, maybe we shouldn't have these policies. Maybe we can actually look to change them for the better, right? And that seems to me to be probably our Argentina moment, our El Salvador moment. The only way we're going to dig ourselves out of this.
I agree with you completely there, and I think we're at a particularly interesting inflection point right now in South Africa. If you look in terms of what has been triggered by General Mkhwanazi, that this very well might actually be the tipping point on that particular issue, which, as we've said before, is the single issue that unites us as a country.
Completely.
Because we're all victims of crime.
Well, and not only that, if we disagree on many things. You can bring up foreign policy and, wow, you will get a million different perspectives. I think, screw America. Oh, no, America needs to be our friend. Oh, I love Russia. Oh, I hate Russia. Slava Ukraine. Free Gaza. Oh, I'm pro-Israel. Whatever. There are multiple issues on that. You can look at taxation. No, we need to tax the rich. No, we need to have less taxation. There are multiple opinions on everything. But you bring up crime with any South African, with any of them. Oh, by the way, it solves the illegal immigration thing because crossing the border is illegal.
Yep.
Without the correct permits. So you bring up crime with any South African. Doesn't matter their background, doesn't matter their wealth, doesn't matter their job, nothing. We all have the same opinion on crime. We all think that it's bad. We all want it to be tackled. And actually, we're all incredibly harsh on crime. It's the reason why there's never been a referendum on the death penalty, whether you agree with it or don't. The reality is we all know what would happen if there was a referendum.
Yeah, it should be legalized.
It would be legalized. I think the vote would probably be 95% to 5.
Completely.
All right? And pretty much the only people who'd vote against it are the people who live in nice, sort of white liberal suburbs.
I would vote against the death penalty. And again, the reason
because you live in a white liberal suburb.
I do not live in a white liberal suburb. The reason why I'm against the death penalty is, would you trust this state with the power to kill citizens?
Absolutely.
No, I would not.
Absolutely. We can get into the death penalty. It's not the show for it.
No, it isn't the show for it.
But there's a reason why I say that, and I know lots of people disagree with me and the ANC, and you don't trust the ANC, etc. I would have a different framework. But anyway, that's something I've been thinking about quite deeply. In terms of, so we've discussed the tariffs. We think we're pretty screwed. I don't think Cyril's going to do anything about them. Do you?
No, in fact, if you look at what Cyril has said over the past couple of days, he's in fact flagged this as a reason to now start pivoting away from the relationship with the United States. So, these guys have this habit of when they're in a hole, they keep digging deeper.
Yeah.
And they'll keep doing this. And the net result is that you're very quickly going to be seeing a situation like what went down in Brazil over the past week, where Brazil has been hit with 50% tariffs. And you might be aware that there's this particular activist judge in Brazil who has effectively been running the country for the past couple of decades, Alexandre de Moraes, who has been Magnitsky'd now by the U.S.
Yeah.
And you're going to have the situation where we're going to be hit with increased tariffs by the U.S. And also, we are going to end up with our politicians
Being sanctioned.
and ending up on that Magnitsky list. Now, point is, in terms of the South African context, they've, unlike the situation in Zimbabwe, for example, where, Robert Mugabe would fly to Singapore on a regular basis in order to get his medical treatment. Our South African political establishment are not that deeply embedded in the overseas travel type of thing, which is why they haven't taken it as seriously as people in other parts of the continent who would be severely impacted if they happen to be sanctioned by the United States. Net impact means that, you're not going to be able to do a simple thing like, pitch up in Europe, put down a credit card, and be able to pay for your meal.
Yeah.
Because that financial transaction will be interdicted. So yes, of course, you can still end up traveling to Iran. You can end up traveling to China. You can end up traveling to Russia. But by and large, for most of the world, your ability to freely transact is absolutely shut off. Very good example, the president of Zimbabwe, when he travels across to the United States for UN business, he basically has a demarcated path that goes through, between the United Nations building and the hotel where his entourage happens to be staying. And he's literally not allowed to leave his hotel in terms of his... So, he's granted access to the U.S. because of the UN. But...
very limited movement.
Very limited movement.
You can't go shopping on Fifth Avenue.
You can't go shopping on Fifth Avenue, absolutely. And now, admittedly, you look in terms of our politicians right now, and they, far more likely to buy all of those goods out here. But it's very quickly going to come and bite them, because it won't only extend to them, it'll extend to their immediate families and all of that kind of stuff. So become really difficult to have those holidays in Dubai if your credit card is not going to work there.
Yeah, look, I do think they might find ways around. They're also quite stubborn.
Oh, yeah.
So they might just go, oh, well, it's fine, no problem, and build more wealth for themselves inwardly. How long it will last is the real question. Whether the voting public is ready for change, I still remain unconvinced of that. I know the pollsters, as I said, are very excited. Certainly very excited for 2026. What do you think is going to happen with those local government elections?
I haven't a clue at this stage.
Yeah, I also think it's a bit early.
There's just too much up in the air right now. And, the interesting thing is that in terms of this national dialogue, in as much as all of us have been quite scathing about the national dialogue, I think effectively what we are going to see coming out of this national dialogue is an opportunity for Cyril Ramaphosa to effectively end up rewriting the political framework of the country. When I talk about the political framework, I'm talking about the way in which government is currently run. And it's going to be driven by the fact that there's going to be this need for a new framework because of the fact that there's only going to be minority governments going forward, and that one needs to come up with rules in terms of how that actually gets put together. And because this eminent persons group of his is primarily an ANC group, which means that they're all under Ramaphosa's payroll, they will effectively come up with a plan, which is Ramaphosa's plan, which he will then end up rubber stamping, and which his vast assortment of opponents within his own National Executive Committee are not going to be able to argue with on that basis. Now, what shape it takes, I don't know. However, it is going to quite drastically change the way in which politics gets conducted between that time and the 2026 elections.
You think it'll be that soon?
I think it'll be that soon. Yeah, I think you're going to have stuff that comes out of it.
I don't know if it'll
quickly.
be in effect by then. I think
no, it's not a question of it being in effect, but is it actually mapping out rules of engagement in terms of, for example, how the ANC ends up striking deals with other political parties in order to maintain power? I think the answer to that is yes. Because if all things being equal right now, remember the situation is that as of yesterday, the MK party effectively endorsed the abolition of private property and has firmly committed itself to expropriation without compensation of all private property. We're not just talking.
Yeah, they want the state to be the custodian of all land.
Yes, well, for all property. Yes, land being the cornerstone. So at that level, you have to say that right now, if you have a situation where the DA withdraws from the GNU, what are the alternatives that we end up looking at? The alternatives effectively become that you're going to have an ANC-MK partnership, which is immediately putting them over 50%. That's enough to run the country. Mm-hmm. And is that a preferable situation to actually riding out, admittedly, a role that's relatively powerless for the DA right now, or to end up effectively forcing Ramaphosa's grip on power, terrible though it is, to then be handed over to a coalition of Mashatile and MK. Now, I want to say something up front here, that I would actually prefer that situation to our current situation for a number of reasons, and not least of which I think that it's very clear to me that Jacob Zuma has his head very firmly screwed on correctly in terms of energy independence. So forget all of the other stuff. I think that the ability to actually implement expropriation without compensation in a land where Boers and Muslims have guns is going to be very difficult to do, because that's effectively going to be a declaration of war against
and Zulus.
Yeah, very
and
much
Zulus.
So. Yes.
I think
it's a very good point, because can you imagine Jacob Zuma trying to go to
the Zulu
King and saying we're taking all your land? That's not going to happen.
Yeah. The problem I have is that it's all about the mechanics of how it will function.
Only one problem.
John. No, I mean many with that. But we do agree on the Mashatile. I think we would be in a better space. I think the things that MK says on a opposition bench, throwing forward to elections, and the things that they would necessarily do in government are two different things. Mm-hmm. I feel the same about Mashatile. I think that's been proven about the DA. The DA has lost all of their principles, essentially, that they held as an opposition party. Everything is at least bendable, if not completely broken at this point. And I think that applies to everyone. I don't think the DA is a special case. I think many people were hoping that the DA would stick by principles, but unlike their communist friends in government, they're unable to do so. And so it'll be interesting. I don't think any of that's going to, personally, I don't think any of it's going to impact the 2026 local government elections. I think the local government elections are going to be driven by very basic things. The fact that large swaths of Johannesburg, Pretoria, Port Elizabeth, etc., don't have water or electricity or refuse removal or sewerage that's properly attended to, and that they're all going to react to that. And really, what you have to hope is that the people who are affected by that outnumber the voters who are not affected by that, because that's the big problem we have really in the country in terms of the voting public, is the people who think who are being given something by the government, have nothing else, and think, well, might as well just vote for the guys giving me something, versus the people who can see that the government does nothing but steal from them. And that line is very clearly the people with jobs who can afford to pay for things, and the people who don't have any employment and are destitute. And so that's really what will decide the local government elections. I don't think this will have any influence, but I will not be voting for any party that doesn't guarantee a drop in my rates. So if there isn't a party, saying they will drop my rates and taxes, I will not be voting in the local government elections. I could give two shits about what your opinion is on that. I don't care if you think I need to participate in democracy and, the DA would be better in Joburg than the ANC, and don't I want my city to be clean or at least running a little bit? No, I don't. What I want is you to stop stealing my money. And so you can either promise to drop my rates. My rates went up a ridiculous amount. I live in a middle-class suburb. I'm, in this country, inverted commas, privileged. But I don't live in the wealthiest areas of Johannesburg. I live in a relatively normal middle-class suburb. And my rates went up a ridiculous amount just this last time, and they've been going up every year. And the amount I now pay every month is frankly ridiculous. I get nothing in return, nothing. The roads in my suburb have not been tarred for more than 20 years. There's sewage flowing down the street.
So why are you not boycotting your rates, John?
Well, it's an interesting question and a good one. For years I have advocated that we should be paying our rates into a trust account with attorneys.
Because there is legal precedent for that.
Right. So there is some legal precedent that goes one way and legal precedent goes the other way. In other words, people have won and lost on this fight. Mm-hmm. So a few things. Number one is it doesn't help me to go against the machine, because if one person goes against the machine, that's just someone defaulting on their rates.
Yes.
And they will then cut you off of everything, number one, and two, they will sue you and win. And then they will add all the penalties and fees, etc. So that doesn't help. You need to get an entire suburb or large areas to do it. Up until this year, my neighbors and the people on the so-called WhatsApp group have been very against it, very much like, no, we must pay even though we don't get anything. It's only right. It's the right thing to do. Have you paid your TV license as well? Let me go register my car, even though that proves nothing. It's just a sticker on my window. It's typical middle-class liberal thinking.
No, John, you've got to get more black people into your suburb, because I can tell you certainly in my neighborhood WhatsApp group, the most vociferous people against paying rates and who will fight it at the drop of a hat happen to be black people.
Sure, so maybe that's the solution. I don't control the property sales. Not that there are none. But certainly everyone wants to be a law-abiding citizen. But this past year, in 2025, I have noticed a shift. Far more people who are saying things like we shouldn't be paying these rates if we're not getting anything out the deal, etc., etc. And so I think that will be picking up. I'm aware of a group in the neighborhood who has started looking at how they can go about boycotting the rates, but they want to do it in a sort of smart way.
Well, the first thing you need to do is to be self-sufficient in terms of electricity, and that's the hardest point, because of the fact that your rates bill includes your electricity bill for most people.
Yeah.
So what happens is you get your electricity cut off, and that basically forces you to pay the rates.
So there's a little bit of strategy that is being thought of and has been done in other places. So, for example, you could pay your electricity bill and your water bill, but pay none of the other stuff. And then lodge a claim with a case with the courts, and then everything becomes sub judice, and then them acting on that probably would be overruled by the court. So, for example, there's a lot of planning going on, and some smart people are involved. It's not the way you've got to do it is in a smart way. And I think if people want to do this, the process you've really got to follow is that you've got to document everything that's wrong in your area. And then you've got to take that documentation and you've got to complain about it to the city council. And you've got to say, here are the problems, please can you fix them? And you've got to give them an appropriate time to respond and to fix those things. And then after an appropriate time that they haven't done that, you can then say, if you don't do this, this is what's going to be the cause. And then after an appropriate time to respond to that, you can go the full hog. And that's really the process that's being followed.
John, why don't you just design an app for this?
Because, frankly, I don't care enough to save everyone from themselves.
And that's exactly what allows the people in power to continue to get away with this stuff.
100%. And if I wanted to be in power, Kanthan, I would run for a political party, not design an app to boycott your rates. Because if I'm going to sacrifice everything, all my time...
You don't have a hope in hell of getting a political party off the ground, John, for reasons we've discussed
100%,
before.
100%, which is why I will happily join a boycott, have pushed for a boycott for many years.
Is it time for another armed struggle?
No, it's not time for an armed struggle. I don't think that's going to solve anything. But certainly it is time to consider making it very clear at the onset, which was the start of this part of the conversation, that any political party that wants your vote should be actively giving you something. So we have a politic in this country that very much talks to the poor and the needy. If you're poor and if you are destitute, I will give you free housing, free education, free healthcare, etc. Those are the things that are promised in every election. If you are middle class, if you are lower middle class to upper middle class to wealthy, what have you ever been promised by any of these political parties? Nothing. And you need to start thinking about that, especially for parties like the DA, who claim to have that as their base. They claim that the middle class is their base. That's what they're aiming for. And if they were better at messaging, they would tell you that what they're really trying to do is make everyone in the country middle class, which is ideal. That's what Helen Zille wants. She wants a capable state, the German state, with everyone in Germany living in a normal-sized house, with a normal-sized car, with a normal-sized meal, etc., etc. We must all be exactly the same and live happy little lives as dictated by our government.
Access to air conditioning, with reduced water
I'm with
pressure
you on the
in your
problems.
shower.
I'm with you on all the problems,
all of
Kanthan.
that stuff.
But that's what the DA
it.
stands for, and many people think that would be better than status quo. The problem is in every election, when have you ever been promised that? Even the DA engages in those poor politics.
Yes.
Even the DA tells poor people what they're going to give them. They don't tell their voters what they're going to give them. They tell poor people. So I am saying, as a person who has voted...
And poor people say, no, we don't trust you. You guys are the party of apartheid. We're still going to vote ANC.
Yeah, fine, whatever. And I'm not trying to shift those people at the moment. I could care. And I'm not trying to shift anyone. I'm a part of a political party. I'm saying to you that in the next election, my goal is for things to get better for me. Right? That's why I should be voting. Things to get better for me. And in a local government election, if you cannot say to me, we understand that rates and taxes have become exorbitant, unreasonable, and you are not getting anything in return. So what we are going to do is we are going to drop your rates back to where they were circa 2023. I'm not interested in voting for you.
A lot of the organizations that were funded via Soros's Open Society Foundation, in turn funded via USAID,
Yes.
are now effectively trying their best to be able to pay their own salaries at the end of the month. And so the chances of them wanting to get into prolonged litigation with any city that actually chooses to do this, is unlikely.
The other thing is how you deal with the likes of Soros and the Helen Suzman Foundation, etc. The way you deal with an organization like that is you don't target one building in Hillbrow that's been hijacked, right? No. You target 62 buildings that have been hijacked consecutively, not a part of the same operation. 62 different operations on 62 different days. And let them go to court 62 different times, because that's 62 times you have to pay an advocate. That's a lot of money you have to spend. That's how you deal with those organizations. You bankrupt them and you let them win on 2 of the 62. And then the other 60, hey, what do you know? You've got buildings back. Listen, that's all pipe dream, because I'm not going to be anywhere near power. But interesting that you volunteered. Something on the Soros, since you brought it up. Did you see that they were directly involved in the Russia hoax?
I did indeed. And it's fascinating in terms of where that ends up going.
Yes.
And
I think people are going to prison, if I'm honest.
I certainly hope that is the case. And these are fun times. So we've got about 5 minutes left to wrap this up, I think. Yeah. So we've basically agreed in the meanwhile that we are pretty much screwed in terms of the tariff situation. And there's not going to be anything that's going to work there. No. We're pretty much screwed in terms of the energy situation, because there's no way that anyone's actually going to move at that level other than...
so vote for Helen Zille so Kanthan can work for her in her government. Is that the answer?
That is the answer as of today, but that answer is likely to change based on what comes out of this entire talk shop that's coming out now in around the... remind me again what they're calling this thing.
The National Dialogue?
The National Dialogue, thank you, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So... Yeah, but
I'm a lot more skeptical than you are on that. I think
I'm hugely skeptical in terms of any sort of authenticity associated with it. It's very clear to me that it's just simply something where the plan that's going to emerge from it has already been written.
Yeah.
And all of the people who are on this eminent persons group, who are being very well paid to be on that eminent persons group, are not going to be objecting to what is said in this plan. They are simply going to come out and say, we have sat and we have considered, and in our view, the best way forward for South Africa is going to be the following things. And Ramaphosa will say, I respect the opinion of the elders.
Let's say it's not as conspiratorial as you make it. So
Why, John? Give me my fun.
I'll let you have your fun. No, you've let me have mine. But what I'm saying is, let's say it doesn't go. Cyril tells them what he wants, then they give him what he wants, and he rubber stamps him. Let's say it goes from the fact that Cyril is a guy who doesn't really do much or say much, and then kind of signs off the stuff he likes. And let's say they genuinely come up with their own stuff, and then they present that to Cyril. Given who those people are, there's no one on that list which screams out to you, wow, this person is likely to have really great ideas about how to fix the social fabric of South Africa, right? And so the chances are you're going to come up with the same things from those people. They're all going to come up with the same nonsense anyway. They're going to come up with things like sustainability,
no, I think
equity.
I think that you're right that all of those buzzwords will be there. However, I'm also taking the view that there will be emerging from this things that structure how, for example, the GNU ends up being put in place.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty clear that one of the things that's going to come out of it is going to be proportionality in terms of how cabinet posts get allocated based on the percentage of votes each of the parties brings to bear.
Why would you think that is a major talking point of a national dialogue?
I think that it's going to be a major talking point of a national dialogue simply because of the fact that the core thing that the national dialogue is going to emerge with a revelation is that the era of having majority governments is gone. And in a situation where you consider that the framework of the South African Constitution emerging from CODESA and everything that followed afterwards was always based on the understanding that you would have a majority government. So that they don't have a situation, for example, where they're able to envisage, how you would end up going about electing a president in the case of a hung parliament. We don't have a provision right now that calls for dissolution of parliament and having elections. We don't, because they didn't anticipate it.
I just don't think the national dialogue is going to come up with any of that. So I stand to be obviously corrected.
Yeah.
Here it is recorded.
Yeah. So
I think the national dialogue is going to come up with nonsense.
I'm saying that I agree with you that they're going to come up with all of that nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But
you think they're going to come up with that stuff as well?
I think it's going to, and that's going to be the devil in the detail.
Okay, let's see. My personal thing is they'll come up with a whole bunch of nonsense. Everyone needs food, and everyone needs housing, and everyone needs healthcare, and everyone needs all the things. And why can't we all have chocolate milkshakes every night? And rubbish like that. And then they'll take those broad sort of concepts, except the chocolate milkshake one. They'll take the broad sort of concepts and they'll go, the national dialogue says everyone needs national healthcare. So therefore, NHI is becoming a real thing tomorrow. And this is what we're doing to invigorate it or make it happen. And the national dialogue says everyone needs housing. So we're reinvigorating the RDP project or whatever else they want to do. That'll be this is all narrative and messaging to me. I don't think anything's going to change. Frankly, I think that they don't need to change anything about majority rule because I think they have majority rule. At the moment at which the ANC believes that they are truly going to lose grip on power, as in the presidency and the ministries that actually matter, although education does matter, but Siviwe Gwarube is useless. But at the minute they feel that they're going to lose that power, they're going to just they'll get the NEC and the people involved will get rid of anyone who stands in the way of a partnership, for example, with MK, and then you'll just have 60% again.
Well, two men say they're Jesus. One of them must be wrong, and I think we need to wrap at this point.
I know we need to wrap. We're not 2:00 yet, but yes. Now I've broken the fourth wall, and everyone knows the time. All right, good. So final thoughts. The Scotland thing with Trump, quickly.
The Scotland thing with Trump, I was so impressed by the fact that normally when you have the head of state visiting a foreign country, the head of state is received by the head of that foreign country. Trump instead went to his golf course in Scotland
Incredible stuff.
and invited everyone to come there, to his palace.
And he hosted them.
And he hosted them there. And he welcomed them onto his premises. And it's a fascinating thing. You know, Trump has Scottish ancestry, which means that theoretically he could claim Scottish citizenship, which means that he could actually end up running for election in that part of the world at some point.
It would be amazing.
But guy is a force of nature, really, John.
He always flips the script.
Yes.
I saw him on the roof of the White House yesterday, just walking on the roof. Just strolling on the roof, and then the journalist was shouting, "What are you doing on the roof?" And he sort of shouted back at them, "Just looking," and he's doing a whole bunch of construction at the White House. He obviously wants to leave the White House with a bit of a legacy in terms of what he's built. He's building a new ballroom, and I imagine he's going to build upwards onto that roof, which is exactly why he was up there. You know, ever the construction guy. All right, a little bit of a shorter podcast. Thanks as always to everyone who watches, listens, downloads, supports, whatever you do. Please feel free to make comments in the YouTube comments. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, and we will, as always, catch you next time. Cheers.
And shout out to our guys behind the scenes who are taking care of all of the stuff that you would normally have to be doing.
Yes, I don't control a board anymore, so I actually am a little bit more focused. But yes, thank you.
Thanks to
the tech guys. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.